Welcome to Leading with Humanity Through a Time of Chaos. This is our second webinar in a three-part series, and the focus today is building a winning mindset, understanding the spheres of influence and control. I'm Ann Purtis, and along with my co-founder, Carolyn Samney of The Pillars, and our facilitator, Cindy Rameau, we will accompany you on this journey. Our wish is that you will gain insights for yourself and thoughts and tips for leading your teams. We ask that you mute your microphones at this time. We are several people on the call, and we endeavor to interact through several means. Our chat can be used for clarifying questions. This webinar is being recorded and will be sent to you this week. The pillars at the root of who we are and what we do is helping organization to be future ready and lead with humanity. Cindy is your facilitator today. She is a valuable member of our team. She's a senior consultant and experienced facilitator. Her experience and knowledge, along with her thirst to learn, has enabled her to co-create and integrate tailored solutions in sustainable fashion.
Hello, thank you, Anne, for the great intro. Hello, everyone. As Anne mentioned, we are a large group today, but we are going to do our very best to keep it as interactive as possible. So I urge you guys to use the chat, share your comments, your thoughts. We really want to benefit from our collective wisdom. So yes, I'm facilitating, but really this is our session to share, a good hour for us to learn together more about the spheres of influence and control, like we mentioned, but even more importantly is how to better lead with humanity. So without further ado, I'm going to just share with you a quote from Gandhi, one which I'm sure you've either all seen or are very familiar with, but it's one that I hope that by the end of the hour will bear even more meaning with what we're going to see today. So keep this in mind as we go through our learnings. So let's start with the stimulus and response theory. So I'm going on the assumption that all of you have heard of Pavlov dog experiments, right? So Pavlov would ring a bell, give the dog some food, and after a while, he would, just by ringing the bell, the dog would salivate with or without food being present. So there was a stimulus, and the response from the dog was to salivate for the food to come. So what I'd like to start off with is a quick poll, okay? And to answer one very simple question. So let me just get the poll going here so you guys get it. And basically the question is, do you believe that we are conditioned to respond a certain way to a given stimulus? So I'm hoping that everybody can see the poll and is able to answer.
Do you want me to tell you, Cindy, the results?
Yes, please.
So we have 94% who said that yes, they do believe we are conditioned, and 6% is a no.
So 94% said yes, we are conditioned, and 6% no. Okay. Keep this in mind as we go through. I'm going to end this poll. This is a very interesting result, okay? So do we respond by some conditioning? And I hate to say that, oh, you were right and you were wrong, okay? Because it all depends how we look at the question. Many people believe that we are conditioned, that our response is conditional. That's something we're taught. Some people believe that it's genetics, right? So we've heard the sentence, oh, you have a short temper because everyone in our family has a short temper. Or people will say things that it's our childhood that develops our personality tendencies and our character. Or they'll say, well, poor performance is due to either lack of training or a bad boss or a toxic environment. We'll hear things like a rainy day makes me grumpy, or I can't function before my first cup of coffee. But the truth of the matter is that although our upbringing, our past experiences can influence our responses, in truth, we still, no matter the upbringing, no matter our past, have a choice in that response. It's not an automatic stimulus to response. In between there's a choice. So I'll share a personal example, okay, to bring that point across. I was brought up by a single mom who had very tight needs. She was brought up by a mom who had even tighter means, and she was brought up in the 40s, okay, right after the war. So when I would spill milk as a child, okay, she would yell and scold me for spilling milk, because in her mind, she equated spilled milk with wasted money. Fast forward a few years, then I have a child of my own. Guess what my response was when my son spilled milk? Out of nowhere, don't ask me where this came from. The words just flew out of my mouth. I yelled and scolded my son. I could have sworn that my mother had taken over my body in me doing so. But when I saw the reaction of my son, the fear that I had instilled in him, that's when I made a choice. Number one, I realized, where is this coming from? I apologized to my son and then had to take some time to reflect, like, how did this happen? And realized that no, I do have a choice. And yes, there was reasons. I love my mom. She taught me so many things, but that's not the way I wanted to be in my house. So I had to recondition myself to believe, okay, spilled milk, well, now I say it's just milk, and get myself to believe that and recondition myself. So the point of the story is, like I said, between stimulus and response, there is always a choice. Even if at times we feel that we don't have, and we'll say, I have to do this, I have to go to work, I can't do this. At the end of the day, there is always a choice, and that is our responsibility. We own this choice. It's really a gift, a power, an ability, whatever you want to call it. But as human beings, this is what makes us unique. Our behavior is a function of our decisions and not a function of our conditions. Okay, so in the sense of weather, if we take the weather as another example, we can't choose the weather, because trust me, if we could, it'd be a lot sunnier today. But we can choose how we respond to the weather. That's where the choice lies. Now, we'll call a spade. Easy to say, harder to do. So I'd like to propose that we're going to go into smaller groups, and we're going to break us down, just because we're quite a few of us today, into smaller groups in just 5 minutes, a quick 5 minutes to discuss why. Why is it easier said than done? Okay, so I'm going to break us up into small groups. What you're going to see is a pop-up window asking you to join one of the breakout rooms. Please say accept, and at the end of the 5 minutes, I'll bring you back. And ideally, what I'll ask is for one spokesperson per group, just to share a highlight, an aha moment, something that stood out in that conversation. Okay?
Could you repeat the question that we were going to discuss in the breakout room, Cindy, please?
Sure. So discuss, why is it easier said than done? Okay, so the choice is ours. Between a stimulus, so bad weather, whatever stimuli is coming to a bad boss, toxic environment, whatever it is, we have a choice on how we're going to respond to that stimuli. But like I said, easier said than done. So why? Where lies the difficulty or the challenge? Okay. All right, so here we go. You'll see your pop-up. Okay, so is everybody back now?
Yeah, I think we're all back, Cindy.
I think we're all back.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so like I said, to have one spokesperson per group, just to give a highlight, comment on your discussions.
So I'll go. I'll be first. I think a lot of it is obviously where a lot of people are on autopilot. So you have patterns, where it's something in our mind. And in order to change that, in order to change your pattern, it takes effort, it takes work, it takes tweaking on your perception of things, tweaking on your judgment. And a lot of the times it's just taking a moment and questioning, like, why is that so? So when you're on automatic pilot, I mean, everybody has their preconceived patterns, and you need to make a conscious effort to change. And a lot of people have resistance to change, right? They take the same route every day. They like to report to the same manager. So those are some of the, why is it more difficult? I mean, those are some of the reasons.
Excellent, thank you. Who else would like to share?
So in our group, we spoke about, it's similar to you, Dominique. It takes energy to make that choice instead of just react as usual. It's often fear-driven, or I guess anxiety-driven. And having a range of options also helps.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Very good point.
Anything else I missed, team?
Anybody else would like to share? From the other groups, perhaps? All right.
Well, I'm
No.
sorry. So one of the things I'd like to add is, like, sometimes you don't know what your options are, right? You
Mm,
might think there's only one option, but if you are introduced to different options, then your perception and your education, you learn.
yes, exactly. Exactly. So I think what I heard back so far is there's the concept of autopilot, all right? The fact that it does take energy. So it's not something that happens always naturally. And that is very true. It does take a conscious effort to acknowledge our, what triggered us, our thought process, and then to acknowledge how that's being translated into our response. So there's a lot of self-awareness that needs to happen. And when we're in autopilot, well, we just go with what's natural. And that's actually how the brain is hardwired. The brain likes certainty, likes routine, likes to know the facts. So it seeks that out. So it does require a conscious effort for us to look at things from a different perspective, to seek out those options, as it's been mentioned. Also, we mentioned like fear. Sometimes fear stops us from looking at other options, depending on the situation. But it's been known that when we work out of a place of fear, it's very difficult for us to be our best self, because we're focusing our energy and time on double checking ourselves, on questioning ourselves, on doubting ourselves. And that takes time away from actually doing certain things and taking certain risks. The autopilot, like I said, yes, I agree it takes energy, but what's also been known is that the more we do this, right? Initially, it takes a little bit more energy, but as you start to do this and as it becomes a new way of thinking, we'll notice that it comes easier and easier. Same with, like people say, gratitude journal. You start a gratitude journal. The first few times might be difficult to find the positive in things. But as you start doing it, you don't even need your journal anymore, because throughout the day, you're finding things to be grateful for. So this is the same thing, is that throughout the day, we start catching ourselves in certain situations and saying, wait a minute, is that really the response that I want to have? Is that really going to help me? All right. So that self-awareness piece, like you say, autopilot, that happens to a lot of us. But that certain awareness piece certainly helps. So when we look at our choices, all right, and checking out those options and how we're going to do that, what it ties into is where we spend our time and energy. Okay? And where we spend our time and energy, there are two Covey, so now I'm going to refer back to the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, all right? So Stephen Covey, he says that we work out of 2 spheres. So live and work out of 2 spheres. The first one being the circle of concern. These are all the things that we care about, but on which we have little to no control. Then there's a circle of influence. Also things that we care about, but things for which we do have a certain amount of control and influence, so whether it be direct or indirect. And making those choices of where we want to lie and which circle we're going to be spending our time and energy is really what makes the differentiation, okay, of that choice. So let me give a simple example to explain these 2 circles better, right? So I go to the grocery store on Saturday. I have my list, I find my items quickly, and I get to the cash. And then surprise, surprise, it's Saturday, I find a long line of people waiting. Now, if I'm operating out of my circle of concern, the thoughts that are going to go through my mind is I'm going to start getting pissed off because I'm wasting my time. I'm going to wonder why they can't open more caches. I'm going to get annoyed and impatient at those in front of me who don't have their bags ready or don't have their credit card ready. And essentially, I'm just getting myself more and more upset and annoyed, but I'm not changing at all the circumstances. Now, if I choose to work out of my circle of influence, is I'm going to change how I'm going to look at things and say, okay, I can't change the fact that I'm here, but perhaps I can either avoid these kinds of situations or I can approach it differently. So one option would be, do I really need to do my grocery shopping on Saturday? When we know that's one of the most popular days for people to do their grocery shopping. It's an option. Another option would be, okay, I'm going to have 15 to 20 minutes of wait time. That shouldn't be a surprise on a Saturday. So what else could I do at that time? And this is where our lovely devices can come in handy. I could check emails. I can clean up my email inbox. I can listen to a podcast. I can call a friend, and therefore making my time better spent. Now, again, this is very personal because some people might not mind waiting in line, right? So it's again back to that self-awareness that if I know that waiting in line is a trigger for me and I see it as wasting time, then what are my alternatives? And those alternatives, to me, working in that circle of influence, require more that I look at those options, that I think about different options, and that I plan ahead. Okay, because if I'm not going to go shopping on Saturday, and that's what I've always done, it's going to require a certain amount of effort, like you mentioned, and energy to reshuffle my schedule around to find another time where I can go. Or having the phone ready so I have a podcast available so then I can just plug it in as I'm waiting in line, for instance. So let me do another quick poll, okay? And it's going to be very simple. We're just going to ask, in which circle do you think these things belong? Right? So let me just do again the poll. Carolyn, I might need you to check the results. So I've sent out the poll. Hopefully you're seeing it.
We've got 14 of 18, so maybe 3-4 more seconds. And if anyone wanted to vote, now is your opportunity. It's, oh, Siobhan's telling us it's not allowing her to respond. That's interesting. I wonder
So
why.
Siobhan, just scroll down because there's more than 4 questions.
Mm-hmm.
But she's saying it's not allowing her to. And Sylvain's saying scroll down, like question mark.
Yeah,
So
just scroll because
Or-
there's several
yeah,
questions.
Pop-up question, yeah. There's
There's
6.
six total questions. 15 of 18. Okay, so we'll just give people another second. Okay, so let's end it.
Good.
Okay, so I'm going to share the results. So Cindy, you'll see, oh, you may not see.
I don't see.
Worrying, we have almost a 50-50 split. We had 8 people who believe it to be in the circle of concern and 7 who believed it to be in circle of influence.
Okay.
Attitude, we have a clear winner, 100% in circle of influence. No one believed it to be in circle of concern. Traffic, we also have a clear winner. 93% saw it as circle of concern, with 7% seeing it as influence. Environment is 80% concern, 20% influence. Giving praise was clearly influence, 100%. And relationship, we had 7% in circle of concern and 93% circle of influence. So you've got some clear winners except for number 1, which was almost a 50-50 split.
Okay, thank you. So relationships, of course, we can choose the relationships that we're in. We can set boundaries in those relationships. That is something that's completely in our control, circle of influence. Giving praise, you guys got it. It's influence. The environment is mainly circle of concern. Now, are there things that you can do in your circle of influence? Yes, composting, recycling, not wasting as much. Those would be the smaller things that you can put in your circle of influence. But as a whole, the environment, there's nobody here in our group or around the world as individually can have a great impact on the environment. It takes a collective to have that impact. So it is more in the circle of concern. Morning traffic, circle of concern. Again, there's none of us that could do anything to really change morning traffic other than COVID. None of us have that power. But what we do have control over is, can I switch my hours around to perhaps not be in the crux of it, and maybe I work from 7 to 3, as my mom did for years, in order to avoid those peak hours. That could be in our circle of influence. But as a, can I change morning traffic? Circle of concern. Attitude, you guys got that? It's all influence. It's a choice that we make. It's our response. Now, worrying. Worrying, again, is one of those things that's circle of concern, in the sense that just worrying in and of itself will not have an impact on the context, on the situation. So me sitting there, it's like me being at the grocery store and whining and complaining falls in that same realm. It's not going to change the situation. I don't own the store. I cannot open more caches. Worrying about having to spend 15 minutes and what that's going to cost me later on, there's nothing that's going to change the situation. But I can choose. There's certain choices that I can make, certain options that I can look at to bring myself closer to the circle of influence. And that's something that we do have control. So, and my worrying, just sitting there worrying about it, won't change. So I really have to start asking myself some tougher questions to say, what could I really do? How can I have an impact? How can I influence? And look for the answers within. All right. So let's take this now. We're going to do a little bit deeper on this one. Okay. Circle of influence, circle of concern. And this time I'd like you guys to use the chat. Okay. Just because we're a large group. So think of our current situation, COVID-19, all right, and the lockdown and all this that we're living. What would you say falls in the circle of concern around COVID-19? So just type in your things in chat and everybody can see. Really good stuff. And I'm sure I'm not going to read it because I know you guys can all see it. Trump. Funny. All right, excellent. Now, what would you say falls in the circle of influence when it comes to COVID-19? Okay. And if you notice the language that we're seeing, a lot of my, I, right? That's what's in the circle of influence, how I show up, how I take care of this, how I communicate. That's in your circle of influence, because the only one that you can control at 100% is yourself and your choices. So excellent. All right. Now we're going to take another little exercise. This one will be an individual activity, okay, to take it again one step further. And for this, you'll all need just a pen and paper. So hope you guys have that handy. If not, use your brain power. And basically what I'm going to ask you to do is just take 2 minutes, okay? We'll give ourselves 2 minutes and draw out your circles of influence and control for COVID week 1 versus COVID week now 7. Okay, so 2 minutes, you draw your circles and see, are they the same? Have things shifted perhaps from concern to influence or for influence to concern? So 2 minutes on that one. I'll try to see if I can play some background music just to. Okay, so if you guys can start again using the chat just for efficiency purposes, what stands out for you when you're looking at week 1 versus week 7? Excellent stuff coming in. That's an interesting one. So my circle of influence peaks at week 4, but is now slowly losing ground to the circle of concern. Okay. And that's a normal thing, okay? We just had, we have our community gatherings and we were talking about that. And a lot of us mentioned when we talked about COVID, how we're going through a roller coaster of emotions, right? So it's not because we found our coping mechanisms and we figured out, okay, we're back into our circle of influence. There are things that can happen that could draw us back, okay? When we start getting a bit of hope, okay, they're gonna reopen the schools and reopen business, and then 2 days later, oh no, we have to slow it down even more. There are aspects, right? There are stimuli that will have a shift. The point, again, that self-awareness piece of where am I? What's causing me to go from one to the other? And how can I maximize my circle of influence and not linger too long or have too many things linger in the circle of concern, okay? So that's where the learning comes from, is how to see ourselves shifting and realize what caused that shift. Could be. And again, this is a very particular situation. Okay, COVID is something that we are, as a society, going through, as families going through. So I might be more into my circle of influence, and all of a sudden my husband or my kids are drawing me into that circle of concern, and vice versa. So because we're living this as a society and as a family, that could also vary. But again, be conscious about it and realize, and then when you're ready, decide, okay, what am I really going to put in that circle of concern, influence? All right. So moving along, all right, where we spend our time also is a good measure of whether we are more proactive or more reactive. So those who, because we all know we only have 24 hours in the day and we only have an X amount of energy. So those who are more proactive will tend to spend more time in their circle of influence on things that they can actually control. Those who are more reactive will be more in their circle of concern. And what happens when we do that is that we're taking away precious time and energy and driving it into things that we said, if it falls in that circle of concern, we have little to no control over. So that's taking away energy and time that could be given to the circle of influence. Now, when we do that and we work out of that circle of concern, what happens is we're actually shrinking our circle of influence, because like I said, we don't have enough time and energy to give to it. On the reverse side, when we're working on our circle of influence, we then expand, it grows. And some of you made that comment that you saw your circle of influence growing as you were putting more energy into the things that you did have control and influence over. Another thing that Covey has seen through his research is that people who work in that circle of influence and do it, it's a conscious effort, like we mentioned earlier on. It does take energy, but it's something that becomes habitual as well. When they do that, what they've noticed is that they are having greater impact. This boosts their confidence. This empowers them to such a degree that many have seen their circle of concern grow. Why? Because they're willing to take on new projects. They're willing to to set themselves higher goals and reach for higher heights. So they've actually seen their circle, both circles, start to grow as they gain confidence and they're empowered by the positive impact that they're having. So here's a caution, okay? Is that, again, we focus on just the mindset shift. Well, I'm going to look at the positive side and I'm going to look at what I can control, like we said.
Cindy, I don't know if you can see some of the chat coming up, but some interesting comments. Sylvain notes, between the circle of influence and the circle of concern, there is a circle of illusion. So I'm curious about that one, actually. What do you mean, Sylvain, about the circle of illusion, if you don't mind sharing?
The thing is that we believe we have influence over, and that was prior to COVID-19, that we realized quite quickly that we don't. And this was an illusion. And it's also because this talks to the notion of expanding the circle of influence that you were just talking about. Mm-hmm. So now what COVID-19 has done and what it has forced me to do is to really concentrate on the middle of these two circles and say, you know, this is if we need if we are to expand it, then it's worth you know, making the difference between things we think we have influence over and things that we indeed have influence over. That's what I meant when I said that.
Okay. So yeah, we do need to make those differentiating factors and know also that we're not alone, right? You have your circle of influence, your colleagues have their circle of influence, as a family, as a team, as an organization, right? So all of those have to mesh and work together. Right, thank you. So I'm hoping everyone could see the chat. So a lot of what goes into that circle of influence, like we said, circle of concern, circle of influence is based on what we care about. Okay, what's most important to you. That's what's going to fall in your circle of influence. The things that you do want to spend time and energy on are the things that are important to you, the things that you value most. So it ties back to your personal values as well. All right. So like I said, waiting in time and knowing what your thought processes are, knowing what your triggers are. So in my example of waiting in line, if that doesn't say ni chaud ni froid, you're okay with it, well then it's a non-issue, right? But if you find yourself in a moment where you're digging yourself deeper and deeper and going into places or just thoughts that don't get you anywhere, that don't change the context, then that's draining your time and your energy instead of putting it where you can have that impact and influence. There's the author, Gary Keller. He wrote the book, The One Thing. And his go-to question is, what's the one thing you can do such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? So that sometimes can even help to narrow down, to funnel down, because we could care about things, there's things that we can do, and then how do we even narrow that down even further when need be, okay? So thank you guys for that. The last tidbit before we move into discussing how it affects our teams or how we can use all of these concepts with our teams is language, okay? So here it's again a cautionary note that the brain believes what we tell it. Sometimes the brain believes what Trump tells it too, to the Trump comment before, but the brain believes what we tell it. So better questions will lead to better reasoning and to redirecting and forward thinking. So better actions and forward thinking. So when we work out of the circle of concern, the language that you'll hear more often is if only, when, why, who, all right? When we're working out of the circle of influence, the language that we'll tend to hear is I can. This is what I can do. What can I do? How can I? These are the kinds of language that we'll hear, all right? So it's just to be conscious of our language because it does play a role in how we're looking at situations and how we're thinking about situations. It's like going to your boss with just the complaint, but would have given no thought to a possible solution or possible other option. It's even, we're so unconscious, like we said, autopilot, where I don't know if you've ever found yourself in a situation where we'll say to people, hi, how are you? And we expect them to say, I'm fine, and you? And when they say anything that's not related to I'm fine and you, it almost, like we become like in shock and we're looking, no. Hi, how are you? I'm fine and you? And I'm even gonna possibly answer your and you before you even answer yours, right? So again, it's just a quick tidbit on listening to our language to see, am I positioning already, starting the conversation with myself or with others from the right, from a proactive approach. So team discussions, all right? Everything that we've seen essentially can be linked back to a team. So instead of I, it's us, it's we, it's our, but the same kind of questions that we ask of ourselves, we can be asking as a team. So to have collaborative team discussions where we see different options from different people could be very, very helpful and keep us in a proactive mindset. But the bigger question that I wanted us to discuss is, how does all this help us lead more humanely? Said in some of the earlier ones, when we were saying, does it fall here, does it fall in this circle, we hesitated. Why? Because technically everything could fall into your circle of influence. But that is the caution that we have to have, is we don't want everything to fall in the circle of influence, right? Because if we did that, again, we'd spread ourselves a little too thin and again, undermine the influence and positive impact that we can have. So my question to you now is, how do we choose what goes into the circle of influence?
Dominique's suggesting empathy in the chat.
Empathy, listening instead of giving directives. More frequent communication.
Yes, yes. So connecting with people, we know obviously that helps a great deal. But if you think the circle of influence and circle of concern, so we all have our circle of influences and circle of concern. How do we humanly, or leading with humanity, help build the circle of influence for our team and for our organizations? How would we do that?
Sylvain noted that acknowledging what we can influence and sharing it makes us human, he believes. And Lena noted that the exercise allows us to understand others.
Yes. Okay, understand where they're coming from, in particular with the situation of COVID. Because like I said, this is not just work from home. This is touching us on so many different levels. Some people lost their jobs over this. Some people are working extra hard because of this. And it's affecting us very differently. So sharing vulnerabilities, I'm seeing, by relinquishing that which we cannot control, example, other people's behaviors, yeah, we can act consciously in how, we may influence people, my example. Very good. By using the circle of concern as a way to establish how you can help with those elements by using the circle of influence. Often we and our team share what concerns we are concerned with, okay? Shifting our thoughts and actions to focus more on how we can help and collaborate with others. Yeah. So when we say leading with humanity, those are all great ideas. Listening, having empathy, allowing people to express themselves, to share their concerns, sharing our own, as Sylvain, I think, mentioned, helps, okay? Because if we start and we lead by example and say, look, it's okay to share, and here's my story, and then you can share yours, that's going to encourage other people. Well, if this person can do it, so can I, and that'll inspire me to do one as well. So that's one aspect. Another one is when we're trying to see is where are we as a team or as an organization spending our time and our energy. Again, are we more focused in the circle of concern, or are we more focused in the circle of influence? And how do we help ourselves to bring us back into the circle of influence? Because we want to, there's, like we say, there's the expression, there's many roads lead to Rome. Well, many teams can fulfill the purpose of the organization, can live out the values of the organization in different ways. So leading with humanity, human-centric leaders, what they do is they acknowledge and they allow for individuals to have their own circles of concern and influence, of sharing that with one another, and then helping each other as a team and an organization to focus as much as possible on the circle of influence. And like I said before, we don't want everything to fall into the circle of influence. So it's how to make those tough choices. What goes in? What can we really act upon? Perhaps there's something that we do in this component which will have extra impact elsewhere. So that one thing, sometimes it's two things, but it's to have those very open discussions, to listen to that language. Are we allowing ourselves to feed into the coffee chat complaining, or are we looking at, okay, what could be possible solutions? Okay? Any other things in the chat that I'm not seeing, guys?
So here we've got Alistair mentioning about the transparency, virtuosity, vulnerability, and compassion. I would be curious as well during this COVID time, do we believe that this autonomy and potentially empowerment that we've made more room for, what would that be like in another couple of months? Are we going to grow that? Are we going back to that proverbial the way it was?
So to make room even for the learnings. So that circle, the little exercise of, you know, where were my circles week 1 versus week 7, to ask others, like, what have been those learnings, those reflections? What did they learn about themselves? What did they learn about the organization? Are there things that we stopped doing, and guess what? The organization continued to move forward. And then asking those questions, do we really need to continue doing that? In our world, there were many organizations that I know many of our customers were struggling with this work from home. But if they work from home, how will we be able to have team spirit? And how will we be able to connect? And how will we be able to watch what they're doing? And yet, many are doing it now, and we had to do it within 24 hours. It was from one day to the next. Schools were closed, businesses had to shut down. Like, it was like, you have to do this. And I'm impressed, overly impressed by all the great stories that I'm hearing. And even people who, you know, for the longest time said, oh, I can't wait to work from home. I'm having a few of my friends who are saying, you know what, no, this is not for me. I miss being at the office and seeing people. So I think it's to find a way to get those reflections and learning. And that's, if you have those team collaborative meetings, you can learn so much so that we come out of this better. And to your point, Anne, not go back. You know, people are using terms like get back to the new normal. But it's just being the best that we can be as individuals, but also collectively as our teams. So sharing your stories and getting others, opening up the conversation so others can share, could be mutually beneficial. So I know we're almost out of time, so to respect the time, I'm just going to leave you off with a few tips. Again, it really boils down to that self-awareness piece for each one of us. Because yes, as leaders, we have influence on our teams. They're watching us, they're listening to us. So we can make a great impact, far more than I think we realize. But it starts with us, and then it's to help others to see. So when they come to you with a circle of concern kind of question, just even to reposition it and say, okay, I hear you. How can we ask that question differently to get us thinking about more options? Just to redirect. And that in and of itself can be a great influencer. And to find ways, and just to ensure that we're doing the best that we can individually and also as a team, and that we don't lose track of the choices that we have, even if they're hard choices, but they are still our choices to make. So as I was going through preparing for today, here's my aha that I'm going to share with you. Okay, so I showed you guys Gandhi's quote at the very beginning. And then I started thinking, well, proactive means taking ownership, taking initiative for oneself. And if, I want to be my true self and I want to live out my values, what if I switched? So I reversed, so to speak, Gandhi's quote. And with all due respect to Gandhi, love him. What if I were to be more proactive in my approach and just change a little bit also my wording and say something like, I define my values. My values define my habits. My habits define my actions. My actions define my words. My words will define my thoughts, and my thoughts define my beliefs. So that was just a little aha, take it or leave it, but it was just something that came to me to say, where do I see, again, the control? Where does that start? And for me, my values are very important. And even having that exercise with yourself. I did a workshop recently around values. And usually when I give people an activity, I tend to do it for myself as well, just to see, how does it go, timing and all of this great stuff. And I realized that even, like conditioning, there were values that I had defined a certain way. Why? Because that's how I was taught to define it. But as I really looked into it, and saw, okay, what am I doing to live out that value, realized, I'm not going to define it. So family is important to me, yes, but my definition of what that is and how I'm going to live it out was different from what I had been taught. And that's where you learn and grow and start doing things. Really, what's your best and authentic self? 2 books that I highly recommend that I made reference to throughout this webinar. It's books that for me, I mean, I've read many books, but these are 2 books that hold as true today or as relevant today as they did when I read them over 20 years ago. One, QBQ, it's called The Question Behind the Question by John G. Miller. That's a quick read, and it just a lot of great examples on how to reframe our questioning to direct us into that proactive mindset. One passage that really stuck to me, he asks often his clients, and perhaps it's a question that you've asked yourselves, what's the one thing you would change to improve the effectiveness of your organization? And what does he normally get as answers? What he calls the list of P's: change products, promotions, policies, processes, procedures, pricing, people, more people, less people, different people. But never, or at least not when he wrote that book, has somebody said, me. How can I change to better myself, my team, my organization? So food for thought on that one. And then the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Again, for me, it's a practical playbook, workbook. This is not a read through in one sitting. It's more you read, you sit back, you do an exercise, you read, you reflect, and so on and so forth. But it really is a good playbook on how to be your authentic self. So any final insights before we say farewell and à la prochaine? Comments, insights that you'd like to share either verbally or through chat, please do so. You're on mute, Anne.
Sorry, some great things happening. Yes, it's all great. What I have done, and will attempt to copy and paste, I have saved the chat because there've been some very interesting points made, and I want to capture those, and we will be sending that out with the webinar.
Right. And I really
like a quick maybe point, and I don't know if it needed an answer, but the question was, what's the time frame needed to make changes, from Dominique? So I don't know if that was meant as a question, Dominique, or is it just maybe a statement?
Yes, I mean, we talked a lot about, changing perception and all, putting these strategies in place, but typically, how much time is needed to make any behavioral change or perception change? I don't know what you want to call it, but.
So I hesitate to say a time. I know that there's a lot of people out there who say to change an actual habit, to make something a habit, 21 days. Other people say 30. I don't think in this case, though, there's a time. I think you start with something easier. Back to our first question, easier said than done. Start with the weather. Focus on that. And then it slowly, like I said, it becomes a habit. So as soon as you catch yourself, I think the key is to catch ourselves. So I don't know if I mentioned this, but the brain tends to seek out perceived threats. Okay, it is hardwired to acknowledge or see threats. And in doing so, we'll tend to go quickly down to the negative. And the secret is to acknowledge that, to see that happening as quickly as possible. It might be at the end of the day, you'll start with, okay, what's my reflection of the day? If I were to rewind and play back the day, is there anything I would do differently? And then how so? And then as you become more and more aware of that and more used to that practice, you'll notice that you're doing it almost instantly. Like when I did the milk thing, his reaction, I still see his face. It was just so like, Sean, I knew in that moment, no, I had to switch quickly. Other times, I get stuck in traffic and it wasn't expected because it's not at 9 in the morning, like 8 o'clock in the morning, and it's not at 5, it's at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm thinking, are people at work at this hour? I should be able to go quickly to wherever it is I'm going. It's to catch that moment and say, okay, Cindy, And sometimes I give myself what I call myself 30 seconds of bitching time, where I allow it to come out. And then it's, all right, now what? What can I do at this moment? How can I look at this differently? There's nothing I can do about this lineup. I'm stuck here. And then I have my go-to responses. So that repertoire, I think was mentioned also at the beginning, a repertoire of responses. You know, so if I'm stuck waiting somewhere, well, podcasts, music, calling a friend. If I'm in the metro, well, not everything, you don't have Wi-Fi. So what else? I have always a book, pen and paper in my purse. And then sometimes it's just thinking about my day. Just that moment of reflection to say, if I could press rewind, enter the twilight zone and go back, what would I do differently? Okay, and just really dig deep. Yeah.
Just to add, maybe a good book if you want to learn more about power of habit is Charles Duhigg. The book is called Power of Habit, and he's done a lot of research on how long it takes for the brain to rewire. And I don't want to quote because I don't remember off the top of my head, but there is a lot of science that's been looked at around reprogramming, if you will, or rewiring. There's some people, like Cindy said, that are saying 30, 60, but there's different research, and Charles Duhigg has done tons of research on the power of habit. So even if you just Google him, he's got TED Talks, you could find him all over the place and might be worth also listening to. And just a good quote that I think Tara just put up here is, you learn from the part of the story you focus on, which is always good to think about. What are you focusing on?
Very, very true. And why are you focusing on it? What's drawing you to that?
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much for your commentary and for everything, and for participating and joining us today. Next week, we have our colleague Bianca, who's going to be talking about how to meet the basic psychological needs in times of crisis. She's a PhD student, and let me tell you, I'm sure she'll provide a lot of great insight and tangible things that we could use. We still have our Managing Change online course that's available to you as well, and invite your friends and family to join in, because the more the merrier. So thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a good